and a dozen other species whose names Johnny could never quite remember and whose biological quirks he didn't have time to learn. There were the Thexians, with their compound eyes. The Morvani, who breathed methane and had to wear environmental suits. The Quilax, who were technically colonial organisms rather than individuals. The Federation called it integration. Emma called it school. Johnny called it necessary and tried not to think too hard about whether his daughter was happy or just keeping quiet because she sensed he needed her to be okay. The first year went fine, or at least it seemed fine from the outside. Emma came home with drawings of spaceships and stories about her krill friend Ticket, who could climb the walls of the gymnasium and taught her how to count in Krillian clicks. She learned the Saurian greeting ritual that involved touching foreheads and holding very still. She participated in the cultural exchange days where students brought food from their homeworlds, and Emma made sandwiches because that was the only human food she knew how to prepare without adult supervision. Her teacher, a patient Saurian named Instructor Graves, sent monthly progress reports that used phrases like well-adjusted and socially engaged and performing at grade level. The reports always included a small photo of Emma in class, and in those photos she looked happy enough, sitting at her desk with her school uniform neat and her hair braided, and her face showing the kind of careful attention that children learned when they wanted to please the adults around them. Johnny paid his fees on time, attended the mandatory parent conferences where Instructor Graves told him Emma was doing well and just needed some additional support with spatial mathematics, which was apparently more intuitive for species with compound eyes. He volunteered for exactly 0 extracurricular activities because he didn't have the time or energy. He signed permission slips without reading them. He nodded when teachers talked about cultural sensitivity and interspecies cooperation and making sure human children understood they were part of a larger community. He felt something that almost resembled relief. Maybe this was working. Maybe Emma would be okay after all. Maybe he hadn't completely destroyed his daughter's childhood by being a father who had no idea what he was doing and was mostly just trying to survive each day without falling apart completely. Then Emma turned 7, moved up to the next grade cohort, and everything changed. It was subtle at first, the kind of gradual shift that was easy to miss when you were working 12-hour shifts and coming home exhausted and trying to remember whether you'd paid the utility fees or if the disconnect notice was serious or just another automated reminder. She stopped talking about school with the same enthusiasm, stopped drawing pictures and taping them to the walls of the hab unit, came home quiet, and went straight to her bunk without being asked. No longer interested in the snacks he left out or the vid programs she used to watch. Johnny noticed but attributed it to normal development, to the adjustment period that came with a new classroom and new teachers. Children grew up. Children got moody. This was probably just a phase, the kind of thing that parents dealt with all the time. He asked her if everything was okay, and she said yes in that small, careful voice that children used when they were trying to protect adults from worry. He believed her because it was easier than investigating further and because part of him didn't want to know if something was actually wrong. The station's medical officer, a gruff woman named Dr. Park who'd been a military physician before retiring to the relative safety of colonial contract work, told him it was probably just a phase when he mentioned it during Emma's annual checkup. "Give her time," Dr. Park said. "Give her space. Children go through developmental stages. She's just lost her primary educator and is adjusting to new expectations. Don't hover. Don't make her think something's wrong when it's probably perfectly normal." Johnny followed the advice because Dr. Park had seen thousands of children over a 30-year career and presumably knew what she was talking about. He told himself the tightness in his chest was just worry, just the normal anxiety of a parent who'd already lost too much and couldn't afford to lose anything more. He told himself Emma was fine. He had to believe she was fine. The physical changes took longer to register because they happened gradually over weeks and months rather than overnight. Emma had always been small, built like her mother, all long limbs and bright blonde hair that caught the artificial lighting of the station corridors like captured sunlight. She was skinny the way active 7-year-olds were skinny, moving fast and eating when she remembered and burning through calories with the efficient metabolism of youth. But by the 3rd month of the new school year, she was smaller, thinner in a way that looked wrong. Her cheekbones were starting to show through skin that looked paler than it should, less healthy glow and more exhausted translucence. Her uniform hung loose on her frame where it had fit properly at the start of term. When Johnny hugged her goodnight, he could feel her ribs through the fabric of her sleep shirt, and that wasn't right. That wasn't how children were supposed to feel. He asked if she was eating enough, and she said yes with that same careful voice. He checked the meal logs the Academy provided through the parent portal, detailed nutritional tracking that was supposed to give parents peace of mind about their children's dietary intake. According to the data, Emma was getting her full nutrition credits every single day. The system registered her presence in the cafeteria, logged her meal selections, tracked her caloric consumption against Federation-recommended guidelines for human children her age and size. According to those logs, everything was fine. She was eating breakfast before school. She was eating a full lunch. She was meeting her nutritional requirements. The data said so. The official records confirmed it. Johnny wanted to believe the data because questioning it meant admitting he had no idea what was actually happening to his daughter, and that was a level of failure he wasn't ready to accept. But she wasn't eating her dinners. She picked at the prepared meals he bought from the commissary, pushing food around her plate without actually consuming much of anything. She said she wasn't hungry, claimed she'd eaten plenty at school, told him the commissary food didn't taste good. Johnny tried cooking from scratch, following recipe tutorials and making simple dishes that he remembered Rachel preparing. Emma ate a few bites and said it was good, thank you, but she was full. He tried different foods, asked what she wanted, offered to order from the station restaurants that cost twice as much. Nothing worked. She just sat at the table with that small, serious expression and claimed she'd already eaten and wasn't hungry, and could she please be excused to do her homework now? He told himself she was eating at school. The logs confirmed it. The system didn't lie. If she was getting proper nutrition during the day, then it was okay if she didn't eat much at dinner. Children had strange eating patterns. Children got picky. This was normal. He repeated these reassurances to himself every night while he scraped her barely touched plate into the recycling unit and tried to ignore the growing sense that something was very, very wrong. The nightmares started in month 4, late October by station calendar, though time was somewhat arbitrary when you lived in a rotating habitat with artificial day-night cycles. Emma would wake up crying, gasping for air like someone had been choking her. When Johnny came to her bunk, she would not, or could not, explain what was wrong. Just bad dreams, she would say when she finally stopped crying hard enough to speak. Just scared. Of what? He would ask, and she would shake her head and curl into herself and refuse to elaborate. He would sit with her until she fell back asleep, perched on the edge of her narrow bunk with his hand on her shoulder, then return to his own bunk and stare at the ceiling of their hab unit and wonder what he was missing. The nightmares happened 2 or 3 times a week, then 4, then almost every night. Emma started looking perpetually exhausted, dark circles under her eyes that made her look older than 7. When Johnny asked if he should take her back to Dr. Park, she said no very quickly, almost desperately, like the idea terrified her. The station psychologist was a Venlari named Counselor Shurin, elegant and professional with that unsettling ability to read emotions that made humans uncomfortable but was apparently excellent for therapy purposes. Johnny made an appointment and brought Emma in, expecting answers, expecting solutions, expecting someone to tell him how to fix whatever was wrong with his daughter. Counselor Shurin did a standard assessment, asked Emma questions in that calm, melodic voice that Venlari used for children, watched her body language with those 2 knowing eyes. After 30 minutes, she sent Emma to the waiting area and asked Johnny to stay. "Your daughter is experiencing delayed grief response," Counselor Shurin said, and her tone was gentle but firm in the way that medical professionals learned to deliver difficult news. Children often process trauma years after the initial event. She lost her mother at a very young age. She's now at a developmental stage where she can more fully understand what death means and what she's lost. This is normal. This is healthy. It will resolve with time and patience and consistent support. Johnny wanted to believe her. Counselor Shurin had all the credentials, the training, the experience with childhood trauma and grief. She spoke with absolute confidence about developmental stages and emotional processing and healthy coping mechanisms. She gave him pamphlets about supporting grieving children. She scheduled follow-up appointments once a month to monitor Emma's progress. She told him he was doing fine, that being present was what mattered, that these things took time. Johnny tried to be patient, tried to trust the experts, tried to ignore the voice in the back of his mind that sounded uncomfortably like Rachel telling him to wake up, to pay attention, to stop delegating his daughter's well-being to people who smiled with too many teeth and spoke in soothing platitudes that meant nothing. But Rachel was dead and Counselor Shuren was alive and credentialed and right there in front of him offering answers that made sense. And what else was he supposed to do? The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November, station time, 6 months into the school year that was slowly destroying his daughter in ways he hadn't been allowing himself to fully see. Johnny was scheduled for a full-shift inventory audit, mind-numbing work that involved counting crates and verifying manifests and trying not to fall asleep standing up in the climate-controlled warehouses that never saw natural light. His supervisor called him at 1,000 hours to say the audit was postponed. Equipment failure in the main warehouse. Everyone got the day off with pay. Johnny almost went back to the hab unit to catch up on the sleep he never got enough of anymore, almost used the unexpected free time for maintenance tasks that had been piling up for months. But something made him check his personal comm and see the time, 10:15, almost lunch, and remember that Emma would be in the cafeteria right now, eating whatever passed for food at the academy. He hadn't visited the school in months, hadn't seen Emma during the day since the previous spring before everything started going wrong. Maybe it would be good to surprise her. Maybe she would smile again the way she used to before everything got so hard. Maybe seeing him would brighten her day. Maybe he could take her out for a special lunch, spend some actual time with his daughter for once. The academy occupied levels 12, 13, and 14 of the central hub, connected by a series of ramps and lifts that accommodated everything from bipedal humanoids to the 3-meter-long saurians who needed extra clearance for their tails. The architecture was functional Federation standard, all neutral colors and rounded corners and safety features that had been mandated by some committee that never actually had to live in the spaces they designed. Johnny took the lift to 13, where the cafeteria sprawled across half the level in a space that had probably been intended as a cargo bay back before the station got repurposed for civilian use. The Federation had tried to make it welcoming with warm colors and rounded furniture and holographic murals that cycled through scenes from 100 different homeworlds, mountains and oceans and crystal formations and methane seas. It still felt like a cargo bay, just one where children ate lunch instead of where crates got stacked. The lighting was too bright, the kind of institutional illumination that was optimized for productivity rather than comfort. The acoustics were terrible, every sound echoing and amplifying until the normal chatter of 200 students became an overwhelming wall of noise. Johnny stood in the entrance for a moment, scanning the chaos, looking for his daughter's blonde hair among all the chitinous krill and scaled saurians and blue-skinned Venlari. He spotted Emma immediately, and the sight hit him like a physical blow. She sat alone at a table near the far wall, isolated in a cafeteria full of clustered social groups and chattering friends. Her table was empty except for her, and she wasn't just sitting alone. She was aggressively alone, the kind of isolation that happened when other children knew to stay away. She was small and still in her school uniform, gray and blue with the academy insignia on the chest, and her blonde hair had been pulled back into a braid that looked too tight and too neat to be comfortable. It was perfect, that braid, not a hair out of place, and Johnny realized with a sick lurch that someone had done that to her, had forced that level of rigid perfection on a 7-year-old child. Her lunch tray sat in front of her, standard academy issue with 3 compartments and a drink bulb, metallic and utilitarian. But she wasn't eating. Just sitting there with her hands in her lap and her head down, and even from across the cafeteria, Johnny could see the defeated curve of her shoulders, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into herself, to take up as little space as possible. She looked like she was waiting for something bad to happen. She looked like she'd been waiting for a long time. Then he saw the principal, and everything inside him went cold and sharp and focused. Principal Valera Kiris was Venlari, tall and elegant with skin the deep blue of Earth's oceans, that shade that suggested both beauty and depth and danger. She had the kind of refined features that came from centuries of selective breeding for aesthetic perfection. High cheekbones and large eyes, and that particular grace that made every movement look choreographed. She wore the crisp uniform of a Federation education official, dark blue with silver piping and a rank insignia that probably meant something important to people who cared about administrative hierarchies. She moved through the cafeteria with the absolute confidence of someone who knew they owned every space they entered, students and teachers alike parting for her without conscious thought, responding to that aura of authority that came naturally to Venlari in positions of power. She walked directly to Emma's table, her movements precise and deliberate, and Johnny felt his chest constrict as he watched what happened next. Principal Curie stopped beside Emma's table and looked down at the child with an expression of cold assessment, the kind of look that evaluated and judged and found lacking all in the span of seconds. She reached down with those long finger hands and picked up the lunch tray, examining its contents with the clinical detachment of someone inspecting inventory rather than a child's meal. Emma had gone completely still, frozen in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap hard enough that Johnny could see the white of her knuckles even from this distance. The principal removed items from the tray one by one, each movement precise and controlled. A protein pack, vacuum-sealed and labeled with nutritional information. A fruit supplement, the kind that cost extra credits because it came from actual hydroponics rather than being synthesized. The drink bulb filled with what was probably juice or milk or whatever children were supposed to drink with lunch. She set these items aside on the table, not offering them to other students, not putting them in recycling, just removing them from Emma's access with cold, methodical efficiency. Then she said something to Emma, something Johnny couldn't hear from this distance, and Emma's shoulders hunched further, curling inward like she was trying to protect her vital organs from an expected blow. The principal replaced the tray in front of Emma with exactly 3 items remaining. A carbohydrate wafer, bland and gray, the absolute minimum that would register as food in the Academy tracking system. A vitamin supplement in capsule form, standard issue, the kind they gave to everyone regardless of species because it was cheaper than individualized nutrition plans. A small cup of what looked like vegetable paste, colorless and unappetizing, probably synthesized from recycled organic matter rather than grown in actual gardens. That was all. That was what his daughter was being allowed to eat for lunch after he paid premium rates for comprehensive meal plans that were supposed to include protein and fresh produce and balanced nutrition. The principal turned and walked away without another word, without looking back, without any indication that she'd just committed a systematic act of cruelty against a child in her care. Johnny was moving before he made a conscious decision to move. His body took over, all those years of military training and combat reflexes kicking in without conscious thought. He crossed the cafeteria in 15 seconds flat, weaving between tables filled with children of species he couldn't name, his boots loud on the deck plating, his hands clenched into fists at his sides because if he didn't clench them, he would do something violent and irreversible. The noise of the cafeteria seemed to recede as tunnel vision narrowed his focus to just his daughter, just Emma, sitting alone and small and defeated at that empty table. Other students noticed him, conversations stopping mid-sentence, as they registered an adult human male moving with clear hostile intent through their space. A krill teacher started to intercept him and then thought better of it when she saw his face, whatever expression he was wearing frightening enough that she stepped back and let him pass. Emma looked up as he approached, and the expression on her face was not surprise or joy or any of the things he'd hoped to see when he imagined surprising her at school. It was pure, visceral terror. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating with fear, and she made a small, wounded sound that cut through every defense Johnny had spent 3 years building since Rachel died. Her hands came up as if to ward off a blow, an instinctive protective gesture that no 7-year-old should know how to make, and Johnny felt something crack inside his chest as he realized his daughter was afraid of him arriving, afraid of him seeing her, afraid of what his presence here would cost her. "Dad," she whispered, and her voice shook with barely controlled panic. "You can't be here. You're not supposed to be here. Principal Curies will be so angry." Johnny dropped into a crouch beside her chair, making himself smaller, making himself less threatening, using every technique he'd learned for de-escalating terrified civilians during his military service. His heart hammered against his ribs hard enough that he could hear his own pulse in his ears. His hands were shaking, and he pressed them against his thighs to stop the tremor. "Emma, sweetheart, look at me. What just happened? Why did the principal take your food?" Emma's eyes filled with tears that she was clearly trying not to let fall, blinking rapidly and biting her lower lip. "I'm not supposed to tell you," she said. "Humans always complain. She said if I tell you things, she'll make it worse. She said she'll report you for neglect and they'll take me away from you and put me with a foster family. Please, Dad, you have to go. If she sees you here, she'll punish me." The words hit Johnny like physical blows. Report him for neglect. Take Emma away. Punish her for his actions. This wasn't delayed grief response. This wasn't normal childhood adjustment. This was systematic abuse wrapped in threats and intimidation, and his daughter had been carrying this weight alone for months while he worked long shifts and trusted the system and told himself everything was fine. "Tell me what, Emma? What weren't you supposed to tell me?" "Anything." She choked out, the tears finally spilling over and running down her pale cheeks. She said humans complain too much about everything. She said we get special treatment, and it has to stop. She said I'm taking food from children who deserve it more. She said I should be grateful she lets me eat it all. Something cold and sharp settled in Johnny's chest, spreading out like frost crystallizing on metal. He looked at the tray in front of his daughter with new understanding. 3 items. A carbohydrate wafer, bland and gray, probably 200 calories at most. A vitamin supplement that would prevent obvious deficiencies, but provided no actual sustenance. A small cup of vegetable paste that might contain another 100 calories if they were lucky. Maybe 300 calories total. Maybe. For lunch. For a growing 7-year-old child. He looked at the items the principal had removed, still sitting on the table just out of Emma's reach like some kind of cruel taunt. Real food, protein and fruit and fluid. The kind of food that cost extra credits. The kind that parents specifically paid for so their children wouldn't have to subsist on the bare minimum. The kind Johnny paid for every single month when the academy fees were automatically deducted from his account. How long? His voice came out flat and dead, the tone he used to use when reporting casualties to command officers. "How long has she been doing this to you?" Emma's hands twisted in her lap, fingers knotting together in a gesture of profound distress. "Since the new term started. Since I moved to the higher grade. She says humans get too many resources already on frontier stations. She says the Federation gives us preferential treatment because we complain the most. She says we need to learn to share with species who need it more than we do. She says I'm taking food from krill children whose biology requires more protein than humans. She says I should be ashamed of being selfish. She takes my food every day and gives me the minimum instead. She says it's fair. She says I don't deserve more." Johnny felt the universe tilt sideways. 6 months. His daughter had been going hungry for 6 months while he checked meal logs and trusted the system and told himself everything was fine. 6 months of confiscated food and casual cruelty wrapped in Federation ideology about sharing and diversity and the greater good. 6 months of a child being punished for the crime of being human in a school that was supposed to protect her. He stood up. Emma grabbed his hand, her grip desperate. "Dad, please don't make her angry. It'll be worse." "No," Johnny said, and his voice was very calm, very steady. The voice he'd used when giving orders to soldiers who were about to walk into hostile territory. "No, it won't. Come on. We're leaving." He took Emma's hand and walked her out of the cafeteria. Behind them, conversation stopped. Children stared. A krill teacher started to approach, and then thought better of it when she saw Johnny's face. They made it to the lift in silence, went down to level 10 where the commercial sector sprawled in a maze of shops and food vendors and the kind of establishments that catered to minors with too much money and not enough sense. Johnny found a human-run diner, the kind with actual tables and chairs instead of perches or heated rocks or whatever accommodations the Federation mandated. He ordered Emma a real meal, protein and carbohydrates and vegetables that had been grown in a hydroponics bay instead of synthesized in a nutrient processor. He watched her eat 3 bites, and then start to cry. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I try to eat it. I try to be good." "You have nothing to be sorry for." Johnny moved around the table and pulled her into his lap, something he hadn't done since she was 4, since before Rachel died. Emma buried her face in his chest and cried like she'd been holding it in for months, which he realized with a sick lurch she probably had been. "Tell me everything. Tell me what else." It came out in fits and starts between sobs and long silences where Emma seemed to be deciding whether she could trust him with the truth. The food confiscation was only the start. Principal Keres had decided that human children received too many accommodations in the academy system, that they were disrupting the cultural balance, that they needed to learn humility and respect for species who'd been part of the Federation longer. So Emma wasn't allowed to participate in certain activities. She wasn't allowed to use the recreation facilities during peak hours. She wasn't allowed to submit work for the achievement displays that decorated the hallways. When she raised her hand in class, teachers were instructed to call on other students first. When she tried to join group projects, she was quietly excluded. When she went to the principal to report being shoved by an older Krill student, she was told that humans needed to be more resilient and stop complaining about normal childhood interactions. "Why didn't you tell me?" Johnny's voice cracked. "Emma, why did you keep this to yourself?" Emma looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You were sad all the time. After Mom died, you were so sad. And I thought if I was good enough, if I didn't make problems, you would be less sad. But you just kept working. And I didn't know how to tell you. And then Principal Keres said if I told anyone, she'd report you to station authorities for neglect. She said they'd take me away from you." Johnny felt something break inside him, something that had been barely holding together since Rachel's transport collided with a maintenance drone and turned his wife into a casualty report and a line item on an insurance payout. He'd thought he was keeping it together. Thought he was doing the right thing by working hard and providing for his daughter and trusting the systems that were supposed to help families like theirs. He'd been wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. And his daughter had paid the price for his failures. "Listen to me." He took Emma's face in his hands, made her look at him. "Nobody is taking you away from me, and you don't have to protect me. I'm the parent. I'm supposed to protect you. That's my job, and I've been doing it badly, and I'm so sorry. But that changes now. Do you understand? That changes right now." Emma nodded, hesitant, like she wanted to believe him, but didn't quite dare. Johnny didn't blame her. He'd given her every reason to doubt him. He'd been physically present, but emotionally absent, going through the motions of parenthood while missing the actual substance. No more. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, that was over. They stayed in the diner for 2 hours. Johnny let Emma eat until she said she was full, then ordered dessert because she mentioned liking chocolate, and he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd bought her something sweet. They talked about school, about her classes, about the friends she'd lost when Principal Keres made it clear that associating with a human student was socially disadvantageous. They talked about Rachel, something they hadn't done in over a year. Emma cried again and said she missed her mom, and Johnny said he missed her too, and it felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. By the time they left, Emma was leaning against his side with the kind of trust he hadn't felt from her in months, and Johnny was making plans. First stop was the medical bay. Dr. Park took one look at Emma and ran a full scan, and what came back made Johnny's hands shake. Malnutrition. Vitamin deficiencies. A stress response that had her cortisol levels elevated to dangerous thresholds. Muscle mass depleted. Bone density dropping. The kind of metrics that should never appear on a child's medical readout unless something was seriously, systematically wrong. Dr. Park didn't ask many questions. She'd been a military physician before retiring to the station, and she recognized the signs of institutional abuse when she saw them. She loaded Emma up with vitamin supplements, made an appointment for follow-up care in 2 weeks, and gave Johnny a data chip with a full medical report. "You're going to need this," she said, and her voice was grim. "For legal purposes." Johnny took Emma home and made sure she was settled with a meal and a vid and a promise that he'd be back soon. Then he went back to the academy alone. Principal Curies had an office on level 14, all windows and expensive furniture, and the kind of understated luxury that came from Federation funding and political connections. She was seated behind a desk made of actual wood imported at ridiculous expense from some Venlari core world, and she looked up when Johnny entered with an expression of polite inquiry that didn't quite hide the irritation underneath. Mr. Hollywood. Her voice had that musical quality that Venlari developed after a few centuries of genetic optimization. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. We don't. Johnny closed the door behind him and stayed standing. But we're going to have a conversation anyway. Principal Curies' expression cooled by several degrees. I have a very busy schedule, Mr. Hollywood. If this is about the lunch incident, I assure you it was simply a matter of ensuring equitable resource distribution. The Academy serves many species with varying nutritional needs, and we can't always accommodate every individual preference. Stop. Johnny's voice was flat. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is about nutrition. You've been systematically starving my daughter for 6 months. You've been excluding her from activities. You've been creating an environment where she's afraid to speak up because you threatened to have her taken from me. And you did all of this while billing me for services you weren't providing and cashing checks for meal plans you were confiscating. The principal's expression didn't change. Mr. Hollywood, I think you're overreacting to a cultural misunderstanding. Human parents often struggle to accept that their children aren't the center of every situation. In a diverse educational environment, compromises must be made. Your daughter is learning valuable lessons about sharing and adaptation. She's 7 years old, and she's lost 8 pounds. Then perhaps you should monitor her diet more carefully at home. Johnny took a step forward. Principal Curies remained seated, but her posture shifted, became more rigid. I have medical documentation, Johnny said. I have witness statements from other parents who are willing to confirm that this isn't an isolated incident. I have the meal logs that show she was checked in for lunch every day, and the financial records that show I paid for full nutrition packages. I have enough evidence to file formal complaints with the Federation Education Authority, Station Security, and, if necessary, the Interspecies Rights Commission. So you're going to listen to me very carefully, Principal Curies. Emma is withdrawn from this academy effective immediately. You're going to refund every credit I paid for services you didn't provide. And you're going to start praying that I don't decide to make this public and destroy your career in the process. For the first time, something flickered across the principal's face. Not quite fear, but close enough. You're making a mistake, she said. The Federation takes a dim view of parents who disrupt educational environments with unfounded accusations. Try it. Johnny pulled out his datapad and set it on her desk, the screen showing the first page of Dr. Park's medical report. My daughter has malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and stress-induced cortisol imbalance severe enough to qualify as chronic trauma response. That's medical documentation from a licensed physician. If you want to call that unfounded, go ahead. I'll see you in court. Principal Curies looked at the datapad, looked at Johnny. Her expression was unreadable. Mr. Hollywood, perhaps we can reach an understanding. We already have. Emma doesn't come back. You process the withdrawal. You refund the fees. And you stay the hell away from my family. That's the understanding. He left before she could respond, before she could find some administrative loophole or Federation regulation to hide behind. It didn't matter what she said. Emma was done with that school, done with that principal, done with being systematically erased by an institution that was supposed to protect her. Johnny would homeschool her if he had to. He'd hire private tutors. He'd quit his job and find work that let him be present. Whatever it took. But it wasn't that simple. It never was. He had documentation, yes. He had medical evidence, yes. But Principal Curies had the weight of the Federation behind her, and the Federation moved slowly when it came to investigating its own employees. The formal complaint process took weeks. Station security said it was an educational matter. The Education Authority said it was a station matter. The Interspecies Rights Commission said it sounded like an internal dispute that should be resolved through mediation. Johnny filed the complaints anyway and hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Attorney Ortiz who'd made a career out of defending contractors against corporate negligence. She took one look at the evidence and told him he had a strong case, but it would take months, if not years, to get any kind of justice. The system is designed to protect the institution, she said, not the individuals. Johnny didn't care about the timeline. He cared about Emma. She was home now, safe, no longer walking into a building every day where she was treated like a problem to be minimized. He cut his work shifts to part-time and spent his mornings teaching her math and reading from curriculum guides he downloaded from the Federation database. He cooked real meals, not frozen rations, and made sure she ate 3 times a day. He took her to the observation decks and let her watch the mining ships come and go. And slowly, carefully, she started to talk about what had happened without flinching. Dr. Park saw her every week and tracked the gradual recovery of her physical health. Counselor Shuren, once Johnny explained what had actually been happening, apologized for missing the signs and started seeing Emma twice a week for therapy instead of once a month. It wasn't fast. Recovery never was. There were bad days when Emma didn't want to eat, when the fear of being punished for finishing her plate was stronger than the logic that said she was safe now. There were nights when she woke up from nightmares about being taken away, about Johnny disappearing like her mother had. There were moments when she would flinch if someone spoke too sharply or moved too quickly. But there were also good days. Days when she laughed. Days when she asked if they could try a new recipe. Days when she drew pictures again, messy and colorful, and taped to the walls of their hab unit. Days when she asked questions about her lessons and made jokes and looked at Johnny with something other than fear or careful neutrality. The legal case dragged on. Attorney Ortiz filed motions and gathered testimony from other parents who confirmed that Emma wasn't the only human child who'd been subjected to Principal Carey's policies. There were 3 other families, all of whom had pulled their children from the academy, all of whom had similar stories of confiscated resources and social exclusion and vague threats about reporting negligent parents. The Education Authority opened an investigation. Station security reluctantly got involved. Principal Carey's was placed on administrative leave, which meant she got to sit at home with full pay while bureaucrats argued about whether she'd actually done anything wrong or just implemented reasonable accommodations for a diverse student body. Johnny stopped checking for updates after the first month. It didn't matter what happened to Principal Carey's. It mattered what happened to Emma. And what was happening to Emma was recovery. Slow, uneven, but real. She was gaining weight, sleeping through the night more often than not, engaging with her lessons, asking questions, showing interest in the world beyond their hab unit. Counselor Shuren said it was remarkable progress given the severity of what she'd experienced. Dr. Park said her physical markers were trending in the right direction. Johnny said it wasn't nearly enough, that he should have noticed sooner, that he should have been there. They told him to stop punishing himself. He tried. Mostly, he focused on being present, on making sure Emma knew she was loved and safe and that nothing like this would ever happen to her again. 6 months after pulling Emma from the academy, he got a message from Attorney Ortiz. The Federation Education Authority had completed its investigation. Principal Carey's had been found guilty of discriminatory practices, resource misallocation, and creating a hostile environment for human students. She was being removed from her position, barred from working in Federation educational institutions, and required to pay restitution to the families affected. The Academy was implementing new oversight procedures and hiring a human administrator to ensure compliance with interspecies equity standards. It was, Attorney Ortiz said, a significant victory. Rare to see the Federation actually hold one of its own accountable. Johnny read the message and felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction. Just a bone-deep weariness that came from knowing justice was too slow and too little and would never give Emma back the year she'd lost. He showed the message to Emma anyway because she'd asked about the case and deserved to know the outcome. She read it carefully, her expression serious in the way children got when they were trying to understand adult concepts, then looked up at him. Does this mean other kids won't be hurt like I was? That's what they're saying. Good. She folded the data pad closed and handed it back. I'm glad. Johnny pulled her into a hug, careful and gentle, the way he'd learned to be with her in the months since everything broke open. Emma hugged him back, fierce and tight, and for the first time in a long time, Johnny thought maybe they were going to be okay. Not today, not next week, but eventually they would figure out how to be a family again. How to live in the aftermath of loss and trauma, and all the things that could go wrong when you trusted the systems that were supposed to keep you safe. They would learn together, and he would never, not for 1 second, take his eyes off his daughter again. The station offered to enroll Emma back in the academy once the new administrator was in place. Johnny declined. He'd found a small community school on Level 8 run by a collective of human and Saurian families who'd gotten tired of the Federation's approach to education. It had 20 students, 3 teachers, and an emphasis on treating children like individuals instead of diversity statistics. Emma had been attending for 3 months and actually liked it. She'd made friends. She participated in class. She came home with stories about her day that didn't make Johnny's chest tighten with fear. The day Rachel Hollywood died in a transport collision just beyond the Rizka Fasra 7 mining colony, Johnny found himself adrift in a galaxy that suddenly felt too vast and too empty. One moment, he was a decorated veteran of the frontier wars with a wife who could make him laugh even after the worst patrol shifts, and the next he was a widower with a 4-year-old daughter who kept asking when mommy was coming home from her supply run. The incident report said it was a navigation error, a maintenance drone that went offline and drifted into the civilian shipping lane. Rachel's transport never saw it coming. The collision breached the cargo hold and compromised life support, and by the time the emergency response team reached her, she was already gone. Johnny received the news while checking inventory manifests in Warehouse 3. For a long moment, he simply stood there with a data pad in his hands, thinking there must be some mistake, that Rachel was too careful and too smart and too alive to just disappear into the cold vacuum between stations. But the accident investigator who delivered the news had kind eyes and a steady voice, and Johnny knew he was telling the truth before he finished the first sentence. The answer never got easier to give. Eventually, Emma stopped asking, which somehow hurt even more than the questions had. She was 4 years old when her mother died, old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but too young to fully process what it meant. She would wake up crying in the middle of the night, and Johnny would hold her while she sobbed about wanting mommy to come back. He would tell her the same inadequate words every grieving parent tells their child. Mommy is gone. Mommy loved you very much. Mommy wouldn't want you to be sad forever. The words felt like lies even though they were technically true. After a few months, Emma stopped crying out loud. She just got quieter, more withdrawn, a small, serious child who watched her father with worried eyes and tried to be good because some part of her understood that he was barely holding himself together. Johnny tried. He really did. He took a position as a security contractor for the mining operations, steady work that kept him close to home, close to Emma. But close was relative when home was a cramped hab unit on a space station that processed ore from 16 different asteroid fields, and his shifts ran 12 hours minimum, sometimes 14 when they were short-staffed or there was a security incident that needed investigating. He learned to braid hair by watching tutorial vids at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. He burned more frozen dinners than he successfully heated and eventually gave up, started ordering prepared meals from the station commissary at twice the cost. He read bedtime stories with a voice that cracked more often than he wanted to admit, stumbling over words because his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the shift he'd just finished or the one coming tomorrow. When Emma finally fell asleep, he would sit in the narrow galley and stare at the recycled coffee in his cup and wonder if he was doing any of this right. The other contractors told him he was doing fine, that being present was what mattered, that children were resilient. He wanted to believe them. He really did. But when he looked at his daughter's solemn face and remembered the bright, laughing child she'd been before Rachel died, he couldn't help but feel he was failing her in ways he couldn't quite name. The solution came through Marcus Webb, a fellow contractor who had 2 kids of his own in the station's educational system. They were having coffee in the break room during a shift change, one of those exhausted conversations between men who both understood what it meant to be raising children in an environment designed for industrial efficiency rather than family life. Marcus had noticed the dark circles under Johnny's eyes, the way he checked his personal comm every few minutes to see if the neighbor who watched Emma during his shifts had sent any messages. "You need help," Marcus said, and Johnny didn't argue because it was true. That was when Marcus told him about the Galactic Federation Academy. The Academy occupied levels 12, 13, and 14 of the Central Hub, a sprawling complex that had originally been designed as cargo storage before the Federation designated Rizka Fasra 7 as a cultural integration priority zone. Someone in a comfortable office on a core world had decided that frontier colonies needed proper schools, that diversity initiatives needed implementation, that children of all species needed to learn together in harmony, regardless of whether that harmony actually existed. Branch 17 was the result, a school that served the children of miners, traders, administrators, military families, and the occasional diplomat or scientist passing through on long-term assignments. Marcus told him the academy had a full-day program that ran from 0700 to 1600 hours, 5 days a week. Qualified teachers from 6 different homeworlds, though most of them were Venlari because the Venlari dominated Federation education policy. Structured curriculum approved by the Interspecies Cultural Council, hot meals included. Most importantly, from Johnny's perspective, it would take Emma off his hands for 9 hours a day, which would let him work longer shifts and stop worrying that his 4-year-old was spending too much time in the care of neighbors who had their own children and their own problems. Johnny enrolled her the next day. The registration process was handled by a bored Krill administrator who barely looked up from her screen as she processed the forms. Name, date of birth, species designation, medical clearances, emergency contacts, financial authorization for the tuition credits that were automatically deducted from his account each month. Sign here. Initial here. Read these policies. Agree to these terms.
Done.
Emma would start the following Monday in the junior primary cohort. A teacher would be assigned. Progress reports would be sent monthly. Johnny walked out of the administrative office feeling like he'd just signed his daughter away to something he didn't fully understand. But what choice did he have? He needed to work. Emma needed structure. The academy was the logical solution. It would be fine. It had to be fine. Emma was one of only 4 human children in a student body of 216. Johnny hadn't really understood what that meant until he attended the first parent orientation and looked around the assembly hall at the other families. There were Krill, tall and chidinous, with 3-fingered hands and voices like wind through metal pipes, their children already taller than Emma despite being the same age. Saurians, reptilian and deliberate, whose children learned to regulate their body temperature before they learned to read, and who communicated as much through scent markers as through spoken language. Venlari, the blue-skinned telepaths who made up most of the administrative staff and whose cultural norms around personal space made humans profoundly uncomfortable because they could sense your emotions before you finished formulating them into words. That was worth more than any administrative policy or Federation mandate. They established routines. Johnny worked mornings when Emma was in school and came home in time to pick her up. They cooked dinner together, Emma helping with prep work while Johnny handled the actual cooking. They watched vids in the evening, curled up on the couch in their hab unit, Emma leaning against his side the way she used to when she was small. They talked about Rachel sometimes, keeping her memory alive instead of burying it under silence and fear of pain. They went to the observation decks and made up stories about where the ships were going and what cargo they carried. Small things. Normal things. The kind of things Johnny had been too busy or too sad or too absent to do for too long. Emma wasn't the same as she'd been before. She was more careful now, more guarded with new people, more aware of power dynamics and social hierarchies than any 7-year-old should have to be. But she was also stronger, more willing to speak up when something bothered her, more confident in asserting her needs. Counselor Shuren said it was a natural result of surviving adversity, that children who learned to advocate for themselves early often grew into remarkably resilient adults. Johnny just knew he was proud of her. Proud and guilty and determined to make sure she never had to fight those battles alone again. One evening, about 8 months after everything came apart, Johnny was washing dishes while Emma dried and put them away. She'd been quiet all day, the thoughtful kind of quiet that meant she was working through something. He waited. Eventually she would talk. She always did now, Once she trusted that he would listen. Dad. Yeah, kiddo? Do you think Mom would be proud of us? Johnny stopped washing and looked at his daughter. Emma was staring at the plate in her hands, her expression serious. He dried his hands on a towel and crouched down to her level, the way he'd learned to do when conversations were important. I think your mom would be incredibly proud of you. You survived something terrible. You kept going even when you were scared. You learned to ask for help. Those are hard things, and you did them anyway. What about you? I think she'd be disappointed it took me so long to figure out what was happening, but I think she'd be proud that I eventually did. Emma set the plate down and hugged him, sudden and fierce. I'm proud of you too. Johnny hugged her back and tried not to cry. He didn't always succeed anymore. Turned out grief and love and relief were hard to keep separate. They bled into each other, messy and complicated and entirely human. Emma didn't seem to mind. She just held on until he pulled himself together, and then they finished the dishes and watched a vid about ancient Earth explorers who got lost in jungles and had to figure out how to survive with nothing but their wits and each other. Emma pointed out all the places where the explorers made smart decisions and all the places where they got lucky. Johnny made popcorn and let her stay up past her bedtime, because sometimes the rules were less important than the moment. He thought about Rachel that night after Emma was asleep. Thought about what she would say if she could see them now. She'd probably point out that he'd screwed up badly, that his daughter had suffered because he was too wrapped up in his own grief to notice hers. But she'd also say he'd done the right thing eventually, that he'd fought for Emma when it mattered, that he was learning to be present instead of just going through the motions. Rachel had always been better at seeing the complicated middle ground between failure and success, at understanding that people were messy and imperfect, and trying their best was sometimes enough. Johnny didn't know if his best was enough. He just knew it was what he had to offer. He couldn't bring Rachel back. He couldn't erase the year Emma had spent being systematically diminished by an authority figure who should have protected her. He couldn't fix the Federation's institutional problems or make the galaxy a safer place for human children growing up on the frontier. But he could be here. He could pay attention. He could make sure Emma knew she was loved and valued, and that her needs mattered more than any administrative policy or cultural ideology or convenient bureaucratic excuse. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the legal victory or the professional consequences for Principal Curies or the policy changes at the Academy. What mattered was Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, gaining weight, laughing again, trusting that her father would show up when she needed him. What mattered was Johnny learning to prioritize presence over productivity, to choose his daughter over his work, to accept that being a good parent meant being willing to fail and course-correct instead of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The story of Johnny and Emma Hollywood didn't have a neat resolution. Recovery was ongoing. Therapy continued. The legal case would probably drag on for years as the Federation Education Authority implemented reforms and monitored the Academy for compliance. Principal Curies would find another job somewhere, because people like her always did, and some other child would suffer until someone else noticed and fought back. The galaxy wasn't fair. The systems designed to protect people often failed. And sometimes the only thing you could do was show up and refuse to let the people you loved disappear into the cracks. But there were also small victories. Emma learning to trust again. Johnny learning to be present. The two of them building something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. It wasn't the life Rachel would have wanted for them, but it was the life they had. And they were learning to make it work together, one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one meal, one lesson, one moment of connection at a time. And maybe eventually that would be enough. Maybe eventually they would look at each other and recognize the family they'd become instead of the family they'd lost. Maybe eventually the pain would fade enough that the love could shine through clear and bright and uncomplicated. Maybe not. But they would try. And trying, it turned out, was where everything worth doing started. If this story reached you, if it made you think about the children in your life and whether you're truly seeing them or just going through the motions, then it served its purpose. Presence isn't about perfection. It's about attention. It's about noticing when something is wrong even when the surface looks smooth. It's about questioning systems that prioritize efficiency over empathy, compliance over compassion, convenience over care. It's about being willing to disrupt your own life if that's what it takes to protect someone who can't protect themselves. And it's about understanding that the people we love don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be there, paying attention, ready to fight, ready to change, ready to choose them every single time the choice comes up. Everything else, all the success and achievement and professional recognition, means nothing if we lose the people who matter while we're busy pursuing it. The morning light on Rizka Fasra 7 was always artificial, filtered through the station's environmental systems and calibrated to mimic Earth's dawn. Johnny had learned to appreciate it anyway, the slow brightening that pulled him from sleep, the way it caught on Emma's blonde hair when she stumbled into the kitchen still half asleep, the illusion of normalcy it provided in a life lived entirely within metal walls spinning through the void. Emma was 10 now, taller, steadier, with Rachel's eyes and Johnny's stubborn chin. She wore her hair down most days, a small rebellion that had taken her 2 years to feel comfortable with after the Academy's insistence on tight, perfect braids. Some mornings Johnny still caught her reaching up to check if it was neat enough, her fingers moving to smooth invisible imperfections, and he had to resist the urge to tell her she looked beautiful however she wore it, because he'd learned that constant reassurance sometimes felt like pressure in disguise. She was making breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with actual butter from the Hydroponics Collective, orange juice that cost a small fortune because real fruit was a luxury on frontier stations. Johnny watched from the doorway as she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs into a bowl, whisking them with a fork, adjusting the heat on the cooking surface with the confidence of someone who'd been taught properly and had the time to practice. "You're staring again," Emma said without turning around. "Just watching you grow up. That's still staring." But she was smiling, that small, genuine smile that had come back slowly over the years and still made Johnny's chest tight with relief every time he saw it. They ate breakfast together at the small table in their HAB unit, the one Johnny had replaced 2 years ago with something larger because Emma kept growing and they kept accumulating things, books and art supplies and cooking equipment, and all the physical evidence of a life being actively lived rather than just survived. "Big day today," Johnny said, watching her push eggs around her plate in a pattern that might have worried him 3 years ago, but now was just Emma thinking. "Nervous," she admitted. "What if they don't like me? They'll like you. And if they don't, that's their loss, not yours." Emma looked up at him, her expression serious. "You have to say that. You're my dad." "I have to say it because it's true. I'm your dad, which means I'm not allowed to lie to you about important things. Those are the rules." She laughed, a real laugh, not the careful, measured sound she'd made for too long after the Academy. "You made up those rules. Doesn't make them any less binding." The employment center occupied level 6 of the central hub, a sprawling complex of offices and training facilities designed to match workers with opportunities across the station and the broader mining operations. Johnny had been coming here for months, attending workshops on career transition, meeting with counselors who specialized in helping former military personnel find their footing in civilian life, exploring options that would let him work from home or keep flexible hours. Today was different. Today Emma was coming with him. The Federation's Educational Reform Initiative, launched in the aftermath of the Principal Curie's scandal and a dozen similar cases across frontier stations, had created new positions for student advocates. Young people who'd experienced systemic discrimination in educational settings could train to work with current students, providing peer support and early intervention when problems arose. It was part mentorship, part counseling, part investigative work, and entirely voluntary. Emma had applied 6 months ago, right after her 10th birthday. The application had required an essay about her experiences, references from her therapist and teachers, and an interview with the program director, a stern Saurian woman named Administrator Kelth, who'd made it clear that this wasn't charity work or therapy for the applicants, but a serious responsibility that required emotional maturity and genuine commitment. Emma had come home from that interview terrified that she'd said the wrong things, that she wasn't good enough, that they'd reject her because she was still in therapy herself and sometimes had bad days where getting out of bed felt impossible. Johnny had held her while she cried and told her that being in therapy didn't make her weak. It made her honest. That having bad days didn't disqualify her from helping others. It meant she understood what they were going through. That the people who were best at helping were often the ones who needed help themselves. She'd gotten the acceptance letter 2 weeks later. Administrator Kelth's office was larger than Principal Kiri's had been, but somehow less intimidating. Maybe it was the worn furniture that looked actually used rather than carefully curated. Maybe it was the children's drawings covering one wall, thank you notes from former students, Emma had explained, people who'd been helped by the advocacy program. Maybe it was just that Administrator Kelth smiled when they entered, a genuine expression that reached her reptilian eyes. Emma Hollywood, she said, rising from behind her desk. And Mr. Hollywood. Thank you for being punctual. Thank you for this opportunity, Johnny said, shaking her 3-finger hand carefully. Saurians had stronger grips than humans, but Administrator Kelth moderated hers with practiced consideration. The opportunity is mutual. We need young people who understand systemic discrimination from personal experience. Theory is useful, but lived knowledge is invaluable. She turned to Emma. Are you ready for your orientation? Emma nodded, and Johnny saw her hands clench briefly at her sides before she consciously relaxed them, a technique Counselor Shern had taught her for managing anxiety. I'm ready.
Good.
Mr. Hollywood, you're welcome to wait in the family lounge. This will take approximately 2 hours. Johnny looked at Emma, checking if she wanted him to stay closer. She shook her head slightly. She was okay. She could do this. He'd learned to trust those signals, to let her take risks and face challenges without hovering. I'll be in the lounge, he said. Come find me when you're done. I will. Thanks, Dad. He watched her follow Administrator Kelth deeper into the office complex, her shoulders straight, her steps steady. 3 years ago, she'd been terrified to walk into a school building. Now she was volunteering to go back, not as a victim, but as someone who could prevent other children from becoming victims. Pride and terror warred in Johnny's chest. He wanted to protect her from ever being hurt again. He also knew that protecting her from everything would hurt her in different ways. Learning to let her be brave was one of the hardest parts of recovery, not hers, but his. The family lounge had comfortable seating, a beverage dispenser, and wide windows that looked out over the station's industrial sector. Johnny got coffee, real coffee, not the recycled sludge he'd survived on for years, and settled into a chair where he could watch mining ships dock and undock in the distance. His comm unit buzzed. Message from Marcus Webb. How's she doing? Johnny typed back, nervous but handling it. Thanks for connecting us to this program. That's what friends do. Beer later? If I survive the anxiety of watching my kid be brave. You will. See you at 1900. Johnny smiled and pocketed the calm. Marcus had been there through everything. The legal battle, the aftermath, the slow process of rebuilding. He testified about what he'd seen at the academy, provided references when Johnny was looking for more flexible work, introduced him to other parents who dealt with similar situations. Some friendships were forged in crisis and proved stronger than steel. Another message, this one from Attorney Ortiz. Quarterly check-in. Federation Oversight Committee visited the academy last week. No violations found. New administrators still maintaining compliance. Thought you'd want to know. Johnny stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction. The system had changed, children were safer, justice had been served in its slow, bureaucratic way. Another part of him knew that one reformed academy on one frontier station didn't fix the larger problem. There would be other Principal Kiri's, other children who suffered, other families that fell through the cracks. But Emma's case had created precedent. The lawsuit had established legal standards. The media attention, carefully managed by Attorney Ortiz to protect Emma's privacy while exposing the institutional failures, had forced the Federation to take educational equity seriously on frontier stations. One child at a time. That was how change happened. Not through grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but through individual people refusing to accept that the system's convenience mattered more than children's well-being. He typed back. Thanks for the update. Send the oversight reports when you can. Will do. How's Emma? Starting her advocacy training today. That kid is going to change the galaxy. Tell her I said so. Johnny smiled again. Emma would roll her eyes at that. She hated when adults made dramatic proclamations about her future. But she was changing things. Every child she helped, every instance of discrimination she caught early, every time she used her voice to advocate for someone who was still learning to use theirs, that was change. Small, incremental, absolutely vital change. Emma emerged from the orientation 90 minutes later, her face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. Johnny stood immediately, reading her body language. She was okay, better than okay, but needed to process. How was it? He asked as they walked toward the lift. Intense. They showed us case files, not real names but real situations. Kids being excluded from activities, teachers making assumptions about species' capabilities, administrators dismissing complaints. I recognized so much of it. She paused, choosing words carefully. It's weird seeing it happen to other people and knowing exactly what they're feeling, but also knowing I survived it. That's what they call perspective. It's valuable. Administrator Kelth said the same thing. She said the best advocates are people who remember what it felt like to need help but have enough distance to think clearly about solutions. Emma looked up at him. She also said I need to be careful not to let other people's trauma reactivate my own. That I need to maintain boundaries. Smart advice. Are you going to follow it? I'm going to try. Counselor Shuren is increasing my sessions from twice a month to weekly while I'm in training, just to make sure I'm processing things properly. They reached the lift. Johnny pressed the button for level 8, where the small community school had expanded into a full educational cooperative with 60 students and a reputation for innovative teaching methods. Emma was still enrolled there, would be until she was old enough for advanced placement courses, or decided she wanted something different. I'm proud of you, Johnny said as the lift descended. Not because you're doing this program, but because you're doing it thoughtfully. You're taking care of yourself while helping others. That's a hard balance. Emma leaned against his side, still small enough to fit under his arm, though not for much longer at the rate she was growing. I learned from watching you. You didn't fix everything overnight. You just kept showing up and trying. I had a good teacher. Your mom always said that persistence mattered more than perfection. I wish I remembered her better. I have all these images from photos and vids, but I'm not sure what's real memory and what's constructed memory anymore. It was a familiar conversation, one they'd had many times over the years. Johnny never pretended to have easy answers. I think it doesn't matter as much as we think it does. Real or constructed, the memories shape who you are, and who you are is pretty remarkable. Now you're just being cheesy. I'm your dad. That's literally in my job description. The school day ended at 1,500 hours. Johnny picked Emma up as always, but instead of going straight home, they made a detour to the observation deck on level 18, the highest public access point on the station, with panoramic views of the asteroid belt and the distant mining operations. They'd started coming here once a week after Emma withdrew from the academy, establishing new traditions to replace the painful ones. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just watched the ships and the stars and the vast emptiness that was somehow less frightening when you faced it with someone you loved. Today they talked. Emma told him about the other young people in the advocacy program, 12 total, ranging from age 10 to 16, representing 6 different species. All of them had experienced some form of educational discrimination. All of them had decided to transform their trauma into action. There's this krill girl, Savix, Emma said, watching a mining ship navigate through an asteroid cluster with careful precision. She was excluded from advanced mathematics courses because her teacher assumed krill were only good at physical tasks. She taught herself calculus using salvaged datapads and free online courses. Now she's 15 and helping younger krill students advocate for academic opportunities. Did you tell her about Ticket? Emma smiled. Yeah. She remembers her. They were in different cohorts but crossed paths sometimes. Ticket left the academy a year ago. Her family moved to a core world where the schools are better funded. You should message her. I bet she'd like to hear from you. Maybe. I don't know if she remembers me. I was just the weird human kid who was always alone. You were never weird. You were isolated by a system that failed you. That's not the same thing. Emma was quiet for a moment, watching a transport ship dock at the station's main port. Administrator Kelth said something interesting during orientation. She said that institutional discrimination doesn't usually look dramatic. It looks normal. It looks like policy and resource management and practical considerations. She said the hardest part of advocacy work is helping people recognize harm that's been normalized. That's exactly right. Principal Carries probably believed she was being fair. She'd convinced herself that taking food from human children was equitable resource distribution rather than targeted cruelty. People are really good at rationalizing their prejudices as logic. How do you fight that? If people genuinely believe they're being fair, you document everything. You present evidence. You force them to confront the gap between their stated values and their actual behavior. And sometimes they change, and sometimes they don't, but at least you've created a record that protects the next child. Emma nodded slowly, processing. The Academy has that record now because of what happened to me. Future students are safer because we fought back. Exactly. That's the whole point of the legal system, when it acts to punishing wrongdoing, but preventing future harm. Do you think Principal Carries learned anything? Or did she just learn to hide it better? It was a sharp question, more cynical than Johnny wanted his 10-year-old to be, but also realistic in ways he couldn't deny. I don't know. I hope she learned. But even if she didn't, she can't work in Federation schools anymore. That limits the damage she can do. There are private schools, corporate schools, places that don't follow Federation oversight. There are. And that's why people like you matter. The Federation can't be everywhere, can't monitor everything. But advocates who understand the systems and recognize the patterns, they can catch problems before they become crises. Emma turned away from the window to look at him directly. That's a lot of pressure. It is. Which is why you don't have to do it if you don't want to. This program is voluntary. You can walk away anytime. I don't want to walk away. I just want to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons. Not because I'm trying to fix what happened to me, but because I genuinely want to help other kids. Those aren't mutually exclusive. You can want both things. Counselor Shuren says healing isn't linear. She says some days I'll feel strong, and some days I'll feel broken, and both are valid. She's right. Recovery isn't about reaching some final destination where you're fixed. It's about learning to live with what happened and not letting it define your entire existence. Emma smiled slightly. You've been reading my therapy pamphlets again. I have to understand what you're going through. That's my job. You're a good dad, you know that? Johnny felt his throat tighten. 3 years ago, Emma had been terrified of him, afraid his presence at school would make everything worse. Now she was telling him he was good at this, the hardest, most important job he'd ever had. I'm trying, he managed. That's all any of us can do. They stayed on the observation deck until the shift change, that moment when the station's lighting adjusted to simulate evening, and the corridors filled with workers heading home or to their next assignments. The rhythm of life on Rizka Fasra 7 was dictated by artificial cycles, but it was still life. Still people trying to build something meaningful in the vast emptiness of space. Johnny thought about Rachel sometimes in these quiet moments, wondered what she would think of who they'd become, how they'd survived her absence. He liked to imagine she'd be proud, not of the trauma they'd endured, but of how they'd faced it, how they'd refused to let it destroy them. Emma had Rachel's resilience, that core of stubborn strength that wouldn't break no matter how much pressure was applied. She also had her mother's compassion, the ability to see other people's pain and want to alleviate it even when carrying her own. And she had Johnny's determination, that frontier war veteran refusal to surrender when something mattered. The combination made her formidable in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with moral courage. Ready to go home? Johnny asked. Emma nodded. Can we cook together tonight? I want to try that pasta recipe Marcus sent you. The one with the spicy sauce? Yeah. He said his kids loved it. Then we'll try it. Fair warning, I'm terrible with spice levels. I know. That's why I'll handle the seasoning. They left the observation deck and headed back to their HAB unit on level 10, walking through corridors that had become familiar over 6 years of living on this station. This wasn't Earth. It wasn't home in the traditional sense. But it was where they'd learned to be a family again, where they'd survived the worst and found their way back to something resembling normal. And maybe that was enough. Maybe home wasn't a place but a decision. The choice to keep showing up for the people you loved, to keep building something together even when it would be easier to give up. They cooked dinner side by side, Emma carefully measuring spices while Johnny boiled water and chopped vegetables. They ate together, talking about school and the advocacy program and Marcus's terrible jokes. They cleaned up together, establishing rhythms that had become sacred through repetition. Later, after Emma was asleep, Johnny sat in the small living area and thought about everything that had changed since that terrible day when he'd walked into the academy cafeteria and seen his daughter being systematically starved. They'd survived. That was the first miracle. They'd fought back. That was the second. They'd built something new from the wreckage. That was the third, and maybe the most important. The galaxy was still dangerous. The systems were still flawed. There would be more principal Curieses, more institutions that prioritized efficiency over compassion, more children who suffered while adults looked away. But there would also be people like Emma, survivors who transformed their pain into advocacy, who refused to let other children endure what they'd endured, who understood that change happened one intervention at a time, one protected child at a time, one family that decided their kids' well-being mattered more than convenience. That was how you changed the galaxy. Not through grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but through stubborn, persistent, individual acts of care. Johnny pulled up the photo album on his datapad. Images of Emma over the years, Rachel smiling in the older ones, just Emma and Johnny in the recent ones. The progression told a story. Trauma, recovery, growth, resilience. He added today's photo, Emma on the observation deck, looking out at the stars with an expression of determination and hope. The story wasn't finished. It never would be. But they were writing it together, one day at a time, and that made all the difference. Tomorrow, Emma would go back to the advocacy program. Johnny would go to work. They would face new challenges and old fears and all the complicated messiness of being human in a galaxy that didn't always value human needs. But they would face it together. And in the end, that was everything that mattered.